Hello, everybody. Welcome to Nate from the Cave, episode number 8. Got lots of dog hair all over me. Didn't even notice. Hope you guys are doing well. I've had a lot going on, so we're taking a little break from Aristotle because I haven't had time to finish up the Aristotle lectures, and that's that. We're just not doing Aristotle tonight. Hopefully, we'll be back on Aristotle next week. And I had to skip last week, and I didn't want to skip 2 weeks in a row. So Aristotle is not my area of expertise. I don't know him as well as I know other things. So I've been having to do a bit of reading to make sure that I do his work justice and prepare all of those. But an area that I don't need a whole ton of prep for is in the area of politics. And so that is my area of expertise, as it were, in the political philosophy. So I wanted to put together a little something on politics. There's been a few things going through my mind recently with just the state of our country here in the United States and the world in general, as much as we're able to know about the world in general. Yeah, there's just been a lot on my mind. And so I put together a little something that I think you will like, and I hope that you will share it. I think that this is a very important and crucial time for us Americans to stop acting like everything is all right. Um, so, yeah, I'm just going to preamble for a bit, see if anyone joins. But when I started studying philosophy back in 2012, 2011, I guess, I started college for philosophy in 2013, but a couple years before that, I sort of realized it was a discipline I could pursue. Like I told you before I ever found out about philosophy, I thought Plato was an explorer. I got Plato and Marco Polo confused. But St. Augustine was the first philosopher I found back in the back corner of an old bookstore, and started realizing that there is more to the story than I had thought up until that point. But anyway, it wasn't until probably my sophomore or junior year. I think it was probably pretty quick. I've always been interested in politics, and sort of as a spectator. And then when I realized politics doesn't just happen, it is orchestrated. Was probably, I think it was probably my sophomore year, so my second year of undergrad. And up until then, I had kind of assumed that everyone was sort of like me, like they wanted the best outcomes possible, and so they were willing to make certain sacrifices and maybe bite the bullet where they had to, and that most people went into things with good intentions and they just maybe don't work out good. Their ideas aren't as good as they thought, or something like that. And then I started reading all these philosophers, and I realized that is not the case. That is not the case at all. Some people have ideas that are bad, like bad from the outset, and they argue for them, and they keep their intentions undisclosed. They don't disclose their intentions. Some of them do. The first philosopher that I found that did that was John Dewey. He's an American philosopher who wrote large portions of American education. And up until the 2010s, it was required for most teachers to read John Dewey's Education and Democracy. Now they don't even read the primary source. They read these secondary sources that just distill the philosophy without exposing the metaphysics, without exposing the intentions. And John Dewey was a deist philosopher. That was sort of his metaphysics. He was a realist in some sort, in some senses, and I think you could fairly call him a realist. And he was just a proponent in. He believed that classes were real in the sense that if you were in the ruling class, you were better than other people. And so he advocated for things like ontologically, like metaphysically better, different, that you're there for a reason based off the status of your essence, I suppose. And and so he argued for things like eugenics and meaning the manipulation of the species, the human species, through selecting certain traits and whatnot. And and yeah, I mean that was my first eye-opening thing, was like not only eugenics in the sense of like controlling the population, but also in the sense of controlling the elite class, and how the elites were allowed to have different education than the rest of the population, and all of these things. And it was just mind-blowing to me. It was like, this guy believes something that I do not, like, absolutely do not believe this, and he thinks it's absolutely real, and he argues for it. And he's one of the most prolific writers in American philosophy. I think he wrote something like, I want to say like 90 some books, but I don't know if that's right. Now that I'm thinking about it, it might be less than 30 books, but he wrote a lot. And maybe with all of his papers and everything together, it might have been up in the 90s if you count everything. But that was the first time I realized, okay, there's not just a bunch of people out there with good intentions. They might understand their intentions to be good because they believe they're true. However, they're not right. They're not right. And the outcomes, based off of those intentions and beliefs and everything else, um, cause them to be manipulative. And so that was my first sort of experience of like, okay. And then I started getting into history. And most of history is the history of politics, if you really think about it. It comes down to um, the interactions between governments and how they interact, whether it be through war or trade or commerce or whatever else. A lot of history is marked by war, but that's also just the bias of most historians as well. And then I started getting into archaeology based off of around certain things that I was interested in, certain historical events, especially around like I was really interested in the Crusades for a little while, so I got really into the archaeology around that, and then I was really interested in oh sorry, the archaeology, and then there, you can find all this other stuff that's not that maybe is referenced in a lot of history books because that's how I found a lot of it. But then you got to go to those other sources, and there's all these personal writings like diaries and journals and all this kind of stuff. So there's a lot of context you can build. Like here's the big event, like the four main crusades, and then here's all this archaeological finding of what was actually going on, and you can kind of make assumptions on like what the trade would have looked like and all this kind of stuff. And then you go further into the personal accounts. So it's not just this generic 30,000 foot view of what the governments were doing, like let's say the European governments, the papacy, and the different kings and dukes, versus the Eastern, like the Turks or the Mohammedans or whatever else that were in the East. That's the 30,000 foot view. Then you get down and you find these not just European journals, but also journals written by Arabs and things like that. So you get this more complete picture. Okay, all that to say, there's a lot to learn, and that we do not live in a unique time where everyone's perfect all of a sudden, and our government has our best interests at heart, and that everything is just fine and dandy. So, um, working my way through history, the history of philosophy, and then specifically digging down into political philosophy in grad school, that pattern recognition just became really strong, where I was able to realize, okay, like we really aren't in a unique time in history. In fact, what we live in now in a lot of ways mirrors late Middle Ages Europe, with the way that there might be kings or principalities, kingdoms or principalities, but what really ran those on the day to day were the dukes and the smaller jurisdictions. And we have a very similar thing here in the United States. We have the official government, we have the figurehead, the executive, the president. But what runs the day to day things are the smaller jurisdictions, the dukes, the corporations. We sort of live in this corporate dukedom, is the way I think about it. And so that makes me very wary of anyone who runs one of these major corporations. And I'm talking like the big ones, like Apple, Google, um, uh, Tesla, Apple, Google, Tesla, Facebook. Facebook's a big one. And there were dukes in the Middle Ages. I think his name was Duke. I can't remember his name. Frederick the Black. I can't remember his name. I don't know if it was Frederick. Maybe it was Bernard the Black. I can't remember. Duke Beebe, Bernard the Black. Anyway, um, he was like he was in charge of a lot of these like really intense policing policies in southern Francia, which is like now modern day, like part of Spain, part of France, part of Spain, which was like southern Francia. I think in like the 911 100,000. It's like the 900s or the thousands. Um, Not super important. Well, I mean, if you want to look them up, the date's important. Maybe it was earlier than that. Maybe it was more like the 700s. Can't remember the date. It's in one of my books. I got this really cool history book. One of, not just one, but I do have this one really cool history book called Empires and Barbarians. Really good book. Really, really good book. Um, can't remember the historian's name. It's like a big old guy. Um, Empires and Barbarians, and I think that one starts. It's not all of Rome; it's towards the fall of Rome. So I think it goes from like 400 to, I think it goes through the Third Crusade, or maybe it goes through all the Crusades. So it's like a good. I guess that's the Middle Ages, isn't it? Empires and Barbarians. Yeah, it's a good book. Um, anyway, this Frankish Duke reminds me a lot of Facebook, at least at the time when I was reading it in like 2016, and just how Facebook, I predicted, would become the policing source in the world, and now we see where we're at with things like AI and other companies that have taken Facebook's place, but Facebook is still a big one, or Meta, I guess. Um, but yeah, you have Duke Zuckerberg and Duke Musk and Duke. It's not Steve Jobs, it's some other guy, right? Steve Jobs is gone. R.I.P. Anyway, there's all these dukes, and then what's even worse is there's all these dukes we don't even know who they exist. I mean, the United States is big. I don't know if you've ever looked at a map. You get one of those big, like 3 foot by 5 foot maps of just the United States. It gives you a little bit of context of how big this country is. And then it's estimated that there's anywhere between 250 to 300 million people living in the United States. I say people specifically because the estimates on non-citizens who live here is anywhere as low as 10 million people, which, I mean, that number goes back really far. 2003, I think, is the first. No, earlier than that. I think it was Clinton's administration was 10 million non-citizens living here. So some estimates I've seen is up to 100 million non-citizens living here, and that, and then some estimates I've seen is there's up to, I think, like 80 million illegal non-citizens. So that's interesting. But there's a lot of people in the United States, and um, there's only a handful. Well, we usually say a handful's five, right? 5 fingers fill the hand. Um, there's just not there's not millions of dukes if we're thinking about it in the sense, if we're using the analogy of these major corporations being the new dukedoms. But in a very similar way, people rely, because a duke came into power because he could maintain the land, and then he would have his knights under him, and the knights would be landowners, and the knights would have a certain allotted amount of men at arms, and they would have certain land, and they all have to kind of report back up. And the way the duke would keep their power was either by force. It was usually by force, actually. There's usually, like, times of peace, a few years of peace, and then they'd have to keep their land by force. Whether a rival duke would try to take it, or the prince or the king would have enough of their nonsense, it usually came to conflict a lot of the time throughout the Middle Ages. And yeah, that pattern is very, 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 very alive today. And the people living in those times, during the feudal eras, the feuds, there's another word for the people, but basically, say the farmers and the ranchers and the people who actually worked the land and lived on the land that the duke was in charge of, they relied on how well the duke could actually manage everything. So in much the same way, we rely on corporations for our paychecks. Um, Small business is still a thing in the United States, but Main Street is more and more being taken over in a very subtle way, not even through corporations buying them out, although that does happen a lot. But now the buildings um, that small businesses operate out of are not owned by those small businesses. So these big banking conglomerates is another huge dukedom, so to speak, and it's not constrained by borders necessarily, especially some of these big. I don't know if hedge fund's the right word, but yeah, these big banking conglomerates that own a lot of the real estate. So anyway, this is quite the preamble. We're going on 18 minutes of preamble here. These are all some of the things that helped wake me up. Now, there's a lot going on in the world. There's a lot going on in our country, and now is the time to wake up from whatever days you've been in, whatever state of mind you might be in, where you think everything's going to be fine. And this is just like it was when we were younger, and the attacks on the two towers happened, and we're going to war, and we're just taking care of it, and everything is fine, right? We made it through the banking crisis in '08. We're still here. We're still kicking. We're still having kids. But it is not the same. And now is the time, no matter how well you are doing financially, because when I talk to some of my friends, that seems to be the differentiator, is those who have well-paying jobs and industries that they think are going to be around for a long time. Most of them are in tech. They are having a harder time realizing that we are in dire circumstances because their paychecks are still coming in and they're still accumulating money. However, those dollars that they're accumulating, that we're all accumulating, may not be worth much in the near future. And that is an important fact to think about. But I'm not going to get into economics tonight. I'm going to stick to some political things. And I will also say I was wrong about a lot of things. I want to start with that too. I've been wrong a lot about when it comes to politics. There was a time where I thought the democratic socialist framework was a good one. I thought that could work. Um, I had a caveat to it, however, that free trade would have to be free trade couldn't be impeded by the government. That was my caveat to democratic socialism. But I can't find a current form of democratic socialism. That probably wasn't the one caveat. I really like individual freedoms, and I don't like the government being able to take those away for any sort of modern interpretation of what they call equity. Because classically, equity just has a different term than sort of the same for everybody. Um, yeah, it it starts with the EQU, so people think it's kind of like equality, but equity classically going back to, gosh, at least Plato is the first one I can think of. At least Plato using equity. It's this idea of first you have a concept of what the common good is. So that common good has to be like a really solid principle. And then equity is going outside of the law. Equity is a subset of brand. So if justice is something that you do politically to maintain the common good, equity is one of the tools that justice can use. And equity is going outside of the strict letter of the law to maintain the common good. So you have to have a really solid idea of what common good is, first of all. So that's where democratic socialism gets equity wrong, is their idea of common good is everybody has the same amount of everything or something like that. Most socialists are communist subsets. That's how they define common good. St. Thomas Aquinas defines equity, or the example he gives in a section on justice in the Summa is, if someone's in jail and they're a violent offender, you obviously confiscate their sword when you put them in jail. And then upon release, if you have good reason to think that this person is going to take their sword and harm the other person, someone else with the sword, even if the law says you have to return to them all of their belongings, you go outside of the letter of the law in the sake of equity, and you do not return the sword back to this person because they're going to violate the common good. They're going to go and use this sword for more harm. So that is a better way of thinking of equity. It is a tool that justice uses in the preservation of the common good. And justice being always, you can't think of justice outside of political terms. Justice only exists politically, meaning between at least two individuals. So anyway, okay. So those are some important things. So I was wrong about democratic socialism. I can't find a framework now that fits with what I think represents common good, has a solid idea of justice. A lot of democratic socialists rely on John Rawls for justice, and John Rawls, we'll probably get into him in the future. I have him on my list that I want to talk about some of his works on justice. He thinks we can appeal to justice basically by common consensus. We don't appeal to a higher good or any sort of transcendental value. And so justice is this sort of thing that's always moving. And he says it's set up by social, I think he calls them social frameworks, basically. But he calls them like those things that you set up when you're building on the outside of a building. I forget what they're called. Those platforms. That's what justice is, basically. So he has these different. You have the main structure, and then you have these different things that you can kind of change on the outside. That's what justice is. And so we set up our systems of justice based off of common consensus or something like that. Can't remember his exact wording. So I think that's incorrect. So Anyway, I've been wrong, and then I also argued for sort of democratic anarchy. Now, there's this very interesting principle in political philosophy, which is true, that on the nation state level, so the interaction between, say, the United States and Canada, or the United States and pick a country, or between any two countries, or between any country at all, this is a true principle. On the nation state level, all nation states exist in a state of anarchy. There is no governing body above the nation state. We have things like the EU, the European Union, or the UN, the United Nations, or we have things like the North Atlantic Trade Organization, NATO, that try to be these governing bodies. Um, but like the EU, for example, their whole board it's unelected, so it's completely non-democratic. Anyway, it is a principle that all nation states exist in a state of anarchy. It is a true fact. And then I took some of the principles of Plato and I thought, okay, again, this is me being naive. If we're all working towards the good, see, this is my presupposition, by the way. If we're all working towards the good, this sort of transcendental good, and it is the case that I can violate the laws of the land, then principally we exist in a state of anarchy anyway, right? Because I can do whatever I want. I just may or may not pay the consequence for doing whatever I want. And so, based off of those assumptions, I argued for democratic anarchy. However, again, I was wrong about it, because there are people who, you just have to have laws. You have to have laws, and you have to have institutions of justice that preserve the common good, and you have to have conceptions of the common good that are based in reality, not just based off of consensus. And so, yeah, I was wrong about that idea too. So anyway, I was wrong by about at least two big ideas, and um, yeah, those led me down a whole lot of rabbit holes. But I had to learn kind of the hard way, both intellectually and then through just personal experience of like, man, this stuff doesn't work out, and trying to fit in with those crowds and whatnot, and realizing that uh, certain ideologies that don't honor true personal freedom, like the Democratic Party, for example, in the United States, I mean, even the Republican Party, for that matter, any of these two major parties, there is an element of conformity that is expected, and that's really not good. Um, it's just the type of conformity that they ask of. So I guess that's true for any group. It just matters if the principles are material and instituted by men, or whether those principles are transcendental. Because same thing is true for joining the Catholic Church. There's a level of conformity that's expected of me. However, the principle is a transcendental principle. And that's something I haven't really thought of that much. I just sort of realized that as I was talking right now. So I'm going to think about that some more. But again, not what we're talking about tonight. So the reason why I say it's important that I have been wrong in the past is for one crucial reason, is that the goal of what I want to talk about tonight is to hopefully awaken some people to what is going on around us, and to sort of shift out of these thought groups that you may or may not be caught in, and to realize that there are certain things going on around you politically that are not benign. They are, in fact, nefarious, and the intention is for your destruction. And what is often the what is often what most of us want to do when we find out we're wrong is to pretend like we were never wrong. And I'm guilty of this. But it's important to recognize that the things you're wrong about, I've learned, and to not paint a false story about yourself in them. Because a principle that will save us is for us to be virtuous. And for us to be virtuous, we have to be honest. And so, um, and you discredit yourself, you discredit your own history. And we have to be able to learn things, right? Like, I have to be able to learn I was wrong about some pretty big things. And one of the things that really woke me up to things is when I was going down the more democratic socialist route and I was trying to identify with the in group of the politically left in the United States, was I ended up, besides going along with a lot of gender ideology and things like that I just don't agree with anymore. Not just because I don't agree with it, but because I think it's basically wrong, and not wrong in the sense that it's incorrect, that it doesn't align with reality. But I also took the COVID-19 vaccine and got a pretty serious injury from it, and that was a big awakening moment when my heart was having trouble working. So there are things out there. Man, that really jumped me out of studying politics historically and started looking into politics more recently. And our government doesn't have our best interests at heart. Let's just put it that way. In fact, they may have the worst interests at heart for us. So, with that, I'm going to dive into tonight's talk. I kind of wrote an essay, so I'm trying to figure out how to go about this. So, bear with me while I still figure out presentation style to do live here. Um, but I'm just going to start reading it. And if any of you have any comments or would like to chat, please drop your comments as we go. And I don't mind pausing and doing whatever to interact. All right. So, with that, again, hopefully this is useful to some people. And if you find it useful, please share and like the video, etc. And hopefully this can be a good piece of propaganda. All right, ladies and gentlemen, friends and neighbors, we stand at a critical moment in the life of our republic. The hour is late, the stakes are existential, and the time for half measures has passed. We must take decisive action now before the window closes forever. What I am about to share with you is not an exhaustive catalog of every abuse of power. It is merely a small but representative sampling drawn from the long and recurring pattern by which governments, our own included, have covertly steered their populations into disaster in order to consolidate and maintain control. To believe that any government, simply by virtue of its existence, acts in the best interests of the people at large is not merely optimistic, it is dangerously naive. History, philosophy, and cold political reality all testify that power left unchecked serves itself first. The comforting dream that our rulers are benevolent guardians of the common good must end today. The time to wake up is right now, before the illusion becomes irreversible and the republic we inherited slips quietly into history. From this recognition of normalcy bias and the pattern it conceals, we will trace the mechanisms of deception, the philosophical duty of citizenship, and most importantly, the concrete steps each of us must take to right the ship while there is still time. There exists a deadly illusion that blinds us to impeding catastrophe, and its name is normalcy bias. Normalcy bias, also known as normality bias, is the profound cognitive trap in which people dramatically underestimate the likelihood and severity of disasters or threats. We assume that events will continue as they always have, clinging desperately to familiar patterns because our minds have been shaped by relative safety and routine. As psychologist David McRaney explains in his book, You Are Not So Smart, this bias arises from, quote, our preference for the familiar and our experience that the world is usually safe, end quote. This is no harmless quirk of the mind. Normalcy bias is a deadly illusion that paralyzes entire populations during crisis, including ones like we are living through now that have been engineered by our government. Normalcy bias allows incremental erosion of liberty to escalate into tyranny and mass suffering while citizens rationalize away every warning sign. History screams that those who normalize the abnormal pay with their freedoms, their families, and their very lives. Today, we stand at the precipice of the same pattern repeating itself. Waking up from this normalcy bias demands that we can consciously reject this lie. We must question every official narrative with unrelenting rigor. Seek out disconfirming evidence without apology, and act with the conviction that our republic and our children's future depend upon it, because they do. This awakening sets the foundation for everything that follows. This is not about left versus right, Republican versus Democrat, or any other constructed division. Unity is the transcendental, and we must be united in the fact that we are being led to our own destruction. As normalcy bias, it is very, 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 very prevalent. It is a huge problem. Okay, so here are a few examples from our own history in the United States of what our government has been up to. And these are just a couple. These are just a few that I was able to find easy access to down in the description of this video. There are links to the declassified documents so you can go and look these up for yourself. A lot of people think that whenever you talk about our government lying, it's a quote unquote conspiracy theory. That's just nonsense. All right. Our government is not innocent, and what they are doing is not unique. Rather, it has reached a height to which the outcomes could cause unmatched consequences on a global scale. What's happening right now? Here are some examples of how our own government has manipulated the populace for goals that do not benefit us, the people. On February 15th, 1898, the battleship USS Maine exploded in Havana Harbor, killing 266 American sailors. Yellow press outlets and U.S. officials immediately blamed a Spanish mine. Quote, "Remember the Maine, to hell with Spain," end quote, was the headline, igniting public fury and propelling America into the Spanish-American War. The conflict delivered Cuba, Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines into U.S. hands, marking the birth of American imperialism. 1898. 1898. Not so long ago. 120 years ago. 100, whatever that is. 128 years ago. Rigorous later investigations by Admiral Hyman G. Rickover in 1976 concluded the explosion was almost certainly internal, an accidental coal bunker fire igniting ammunition stores. There was no evidence of an external mind. The public was led into war on a pretext that later evidence proved false. Now, that's interesting also, is that the government didn't necessarily plan this one, although they could have. They were extremely opportunistic to get into the Spanish-American War. In March 1962, the Joint Chiefs of Staff presented Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara with a detailed proposal for a series of false flag operations to justify invading Cuba. The declassified memorandum, quote, which is titled, quote, "Justification for U.S. Military Intervention in Cuba," outlined staging terrorist attacks on U.S. soil and military targets, then blaming Fidel Castro. Specific plans included blowing up a U.S. ship in Guantanamo Bay. Remember the Maine, that headline from the yellow press outlets was explicitly referenced. sinking boats of Cuban refugees, hijacking civilian airliners, bombing U.S. cities, and shooting down a drone airliner painted to look like a passenger flight. Does that remind you anything that happened in September of 2001? Those were all listed. The memo stated, quote, "We could blow up a U.S. ship in Guantanamo Bay and blame Cuba," end quote, and called for, quote, "lists of casualties," end quote, with fabricated names to maximize outrage. President Kennedy rejected it, but the document provides the highest levels. The document proves the highest levels of the U.S. military were prepared to kill Americans to manufacture consent for war. Again, the link to this memo and all the declassified documents, I think it's a 15-page document, is in the description. Please go read it. Stop being ignorant to what these people can plan. In 1964, the Johnson administration deliberately exaggerated and declassified NSA documents later proved fabricated key elements of North Vietnamese attacks on U.S. vessels. The second, quote, attack on August 4th never occurred, yet officials presented Congress with 2 unprovoked assaults, securing the Gulf of Tonkin resolution and launching full-scale Vietnam War. The human cost of that war was more than 58,000 American lives and millions of Vietnamese. Officials lied boldly while the public normalized the story as legitimate national defense. This story was everywhere, always. This was the reason why we went to Vietnam. Always. Like the way we hear today, these stories repeated, like Iran has a nuke or whatever it is, the way it's just constantly thrown out there as if it's justification. This is what was going on in the 60s for Vietnam. It's crazy. These were not accidents of history. They were calculated betrayals executed while citizens clung to the illusion of normalcy. I mean, the Vietnam era is a great example. Go and look back between the hippies and the blue collar divide, where everyone's just hanging on to these different norms. It's just crazy. History thus reveals the pattern. Philosophy now shows us why rulers master it. Again, these are all well documented, and I put the links in the description to just those 3. These are just three. Like, you can basically go every year and find that our government is up to something like this. And the freaking Operation Northwoods in 1962, the list of ideas they had to blame on Castro is insane. It's just crazy. It's just crazy. There's a reason why people question 9/11. There's a reason why Oklahoma City bombing is questioned. There's a reason why all this. And there's a lot of documents that back it up. Our government does not have our best interests at heart. All right. Now we're going to go back in time a little bit. In 1532, Niccolo Machiavelli, he published a work written for his prince, the Medicis. After he was tortured by them, then he was hired as a secretary and wrote, "How do you preserve power?" Okay, so in the Prince, it's just all these little chapters on different ways to preserve power in different circumstances. I think it's chapter 12. I didn't reference the book when I was writing this out, but I believe it's chapter 12. He warned, quote, "Whoever becomes master of a city," this is the chapter on, so if you're looking at the Prince, it's the chapter on how to overthrow a republic, by the way. So we're a republic. We're a constitutional republic. This happens to be a lot of patterns lost through time, lack of education, transparent history, and narrative pushes. 100%. Absolutely. Absolutely. But share this video with people who don't know any of it. Maybe it'll help. So 1532, in the chapter, I believe it's chapter 12, on how to overthrow a republic. I believe that the title is on of the chapter is like dealing with republics or something like that. Of the Prince, written by Niccolo Machiavelli for the Medicis, 1532, he wrote, quote, "Whoever becomes master of a city accustomed to living in freedom and does not destroy it may reckon on being destroyed by it. A ruler seizing power over a free people must inflict all necessary injuries at once, so the shock is brief and resentment does not fester." Okay, so we've had this slow build. We've been experiencing this slow build of attacks on us through our food, through our education, through an attack on family. These have been slow ones. If you can see these patterns in history, and don't just take my word for it, go and read. To overthrow a republic, you have to do it all at once so that fester doesn't build. A ruler seizing power over free people must inflict all necessary injuries at once, so the shock is brief and resentment does not fester. It's the reason why people are like, "Oh, I feel like something's coming. I feel like something's coming," because it's leading to that. You can't overthrow a republic without it being the necessary amount of injury all at once to remove the factions that will be a problem for you in the future. Factions that will be a problem for you in the future: free thinking people who think that we should continue our generations here for a long time and that things like the Bill of Rights are awesome. You want to get rid of those people. The way you do that is you make concessions and you basically divvy up the land or positions and you give those to the people who you think are going to benefit you in the long run. So you being the governing body. And everyone else you lock up or you kill. That's how you do it. So we've had this really slow roll of stuff, but it's building to an event. And again, where there's between 250 and 300 million of us, estimates between 10 to 100 million people aren't even citizens, and maybe 80 million of them are illegal citizens. So let's just say 200 million people you got to deal with, and then you divide those by the main political parties. You got maybe 100 million people you got to deal with. They're working on it, okay? And there's no money that is hard for them to do. Okay, I'm just going to keep going. I'm going to keep going on tangents. We're going to be here till midnight. All right. So that's one part of Machiavelli. Okay, just keep that in mind. That's how you overthrow a republic. The necessity and method of lying to people. When it comes to deception, Machiavelli is equally blunt. Quote, "A wise lord cannot, nor ought he to, keep his promises when such observances would place him at a disadvantage. Men are so simple and so subject to present necessities that a deceiver will always find someone who is willing to be deceived." End quote. A prince must, quote, "be a great pretender and dissembler," end quote, appearing merciful, faithful, and humane while acting as circumstances demand. He cites Alexander VI, who, quote, "never did anything other than deceiving men," and like looked up to him, by the way. Alexander VI was like successful, yet succeeded brilliantly. In a world of deceit, honesty destroys rulers. Okay, you understand that? In a world of deceit, that is a presupposition about the state of nature. This Machiavellian metaphysics is what a lot of people are still thinking in. When I was talking about John Dewey earlier, and I realized there's these people who just have different metaphysics than I do, than I ever thought they ever would. This is one of them, that a certain class exists with like a different essence, basically. Like the ruling class is literally a better type of human, maybe even a different type of human than the rest of the people that they rule. This same supposition that in a world of deceit, honesty destroys rulers. Literally a world of deceit. It is to say that deceit is the constant. And so to not be deceitful would to like not act with reality. It's just absolutely on its head. All right. I need to calm down. Modern governments follow this exact manual. Well, maybe not exact, okay? This was 1532. However, and in the future we'll do this, but you can go since Machiavelli, and then there's obviously predecessors to Machiavelli. He wasn't the first one to like come up with these ideas, but he was the first one to sort of formalize these different ways to maintain, to consolidate and maintain power. I believe that's what he put in the introduction. These are the different ways. To my prince, the Medici, these are the different ways and the different circumstances that I can observe now in my travels, because he was a secretary and an ambassador, so he's going around all over. These are the ways that I predict that you can consolidate and maintain your power. That's the thesis of the prince. Those principles have been expanded and then like through the scientific method have been worked out. I mean, and then oh my gosh, you want to go down a whole nother rabbit hole of declassified documents where these things have been scientifically, like with the scientific method, how to control and manipulate people and populations. Look into MK Ultra and all of its sub things like MK Search and MK. There's like a bunch of them, a bunch of MK programs that were declassified in the 90s, I think. But those programs ended in like 75, 1973, 1975. They ended. Anyway, Machiavelli wrote this in 1532, but these ideas have been picked up and expanded on and perfected over the years. This deception thrives because we fail to recognize it. So modern governments follow this exact manual. Not really. Their manual's a lot better now. This deception thrives because we fail to recognize it. Indeed, the only reason why this deception thrives is because we fail as a collective to recognize it. Yet the mechanisms of control today make the pattern unmistakable. Okay, so that's just an example of how, and this is 1532. So again, old doesn't mean it was perfect. Old means it was first. It has been perfected since then, and there are like where he wrote a chapter that takes up a page and a half on how to overthrow a republic. There are now volumes on how to overthrow a republic, and then there have been overthrowing republics that have taken place, and we participated in them as the United States. All right. Yeah. Have you ever heard of was it the Czech Republic, the Velvet Revolution in the Czech Republic, or I guess it was Czechoslovakia, because I think it was one of the satellite states, still one of the Soviet states. So it's Czechoslovakia. So that's not overthrowing a republic, but and then there's color revolutions. Like, come on, look at the last 100 years of just what the West is doing. Wake up. Wake up. I know the people watching right now, you're awake, but wake up. All right. All right. So the question is not merely how rulers deceive, but why. The motives are both strategic and profoundly psychological. Okay, so this was my problem. Is like, there's no way people would really do this. Why would they ever do that? What's the motive? Okay. The motives are both strategic and profoundly psychological. Deception allows leaders to pursue policies, wars, wealth transfers, ideological agendas, etc., that a free population would otherwise reject. It preserves the illusion of legitimacy and prevents revolt. Once power is seized, the drive to retain it becomes self-perpetuating. As the 19th century historian Lord Acton observed, quote, "Power tends to corrupt and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Great men are almost always bad men, even when they exercise influence and not authority. Still more when you superadd the tendency or the certainty of corruption by authority." Psychology illuminates the transformation. In the book The Power Paradox, psychologist Keltner, Dr. Keltner, I don't know how to pronounce his first name, Dr. Keltner, explains, quote, "We rise in power and make a difference in the world due to what is best about human nature, but we fall from power due to what is worst. We gain a capacity to make a difference in the world by enhancing the lives of others, but the very experience of having power and privilege leads us to behave in our worst moments, like impulsive, out of control sociopaths. I think he gets that second part right. I don't agree with his whole work. I don't even agree with that quotation I put in here. I don't even agree with all of that. I don't think people rise to power because they want to make a difference in the world, in the sense that, in the altruistic sense, they want to make a difference in the world. I mean, they literally write about it. They want to change the world to the way that they think it should be. So if that's what you mean by make a difference, then yeah, absolutely, they want to make a difference. But saying it like, oh, I want to make a difference, that's like a colloquialism we use. Like, I want to make a difference, meaning I have good intentions. That is not the case with people who get into power. They do not all have good intentions. Power reduces empathy, increases impulsivity and self focus, and lowers the physiological stress of lying. Studies show that those in positions of power experience less emotional, cognitive, and physiological discomfort when deceiving others. They literally lie more easily and with less remorse. Interesting. I didn't put a reference to those studies. Sorry about that. I don't know which studies they are, so I guess look that up independently. Fact check me. Fact check me. All right. At a deeper level, many who attain high office are driven by narcissism, entitlement, and an inflated sense of exceptionalism. The belief that ordinary moral rules do not apply to them. Fear of losing status, wealth, influence, and legacy fuels paranoia and rationalization. I think that's part of it. I think that's part of it, but I don't think it's all fear. I I really, really believe, just by reading a number of these people, especially like British people in the last 200 years, like British kings and British families, it is not like a fear of losing office, although I think that's part of it. The primary driver is the concept. You can look up this concept called the right to rule. The right to rule, and it is this idea that metaphysically there are certain families on this earth that have a superior bloodline. They believe in a different metaphysics. They don't think we're all created equal and endowed by our creator with unalienable rights, which we do. And that's in the Declaration of Independence, by the way. You might want to read our own documents if you haven't. Plato in the Republic described the tyrant as the most wretched of men, surrounded by enemies, enslaved by his own disordered desires, forever using deception because he can never trust or be trusted. Okay, so Plato, though, surrounded by enemies, enslaved by his own disordered desires, Plato had a very transcendental conception of the good, and that the will ought to be oriented to the good. So to have disordered desires means to have that will oriented toward the base. So again, you have to have a conception of the good to have a solid conception of the common good in order to have any sort of conception of justice. So Plato's critique is a very, very nuanced metaphysical critique, where some of these other modern philosophers and psychologists, they're just not very nuanced. I don't think they're very good at metaphysics at all. Like we saw from, like I almost didn't include that quote by Dr. Keltner, but I include it because we got to realize modern psychology, they don't have very good metaphysics. However, they do use the scientific method to get pretty interesting things that we can use to understand psychology. So once power is tasted, the addiction to control, and the terror of accountability make truth a threat to be suppressed. This is why deception is not the exception in politics. It is often the rule. It is the rule. Deception is the rule. Look at our Congress, our House of Representatives, and our Senate. The whole Congress, they are all actors, every single one of them. This is just my opinion, okay? Let me just say that first of all. That's just my opinion. But you will understand them better if you assume that they are all actors playing a part. Even this nice Tim Burchett guy who's coming out saying UFOs are real and you won't believe what they told him in a skiff. Maybe he's naive. Maybe that's the role he's playing. Okay? That's all I'm saying. It is often the rule. It is the rule. Okay? This is why deception is not the exception in politics. It is the rule. I know I'm the one who wrote this, and I put the word often there, but I'm sorry that I did. It needs to be out of there because deception is not the exception in politics. It is the rule. Understanding these motives strips away the final layers of normalcy bias and prepares us to examine the specific mechanisms used today. Okay, I didn't need to say that last sentence. That was me writing this like an essay. This is hopefully that strips away the final layers of normalcy bias. Hopefully. I can't guarantee that for you. And again, to my friends, Corey, whoever else is watching, I know this isn't you, but the people in your life who need to hear this, send it to them. Hopefully, I'm presenting it in a way that's fun to watch, and they'll want to hang along. Okay, here's a very important point, a caveat that I need to include because I've used the term power a lot. To be perfectly clear, when I speak of the corrupting influence of power and the motives that drive rulers to deceive and cling to it, I do not mean power in the Marxist sense of class based economic domination. Okay, I need to be very clear about that. I do not mean this power in the sense that Marxism can be broken into two categories. You got the really extreme communists and you got the softer forms of socialism. Still Marxist, okay? I'm talking to both of you guys here. I'm not talking about your power dynamics. This is not bourgeoisie oppression or the inevitable dialectic of history. Okay? By the way, read some metaphysics and then read the Communist Manifesto again. Marx's dialectic sucks. If you believe it, you're wrong. Rather, I refer to the timeless universal truth that political authority tends to corrupt the individuals who wield it, regardless of their class, ideology, or background. As Lord Acton warned, and as both history and psychology repeatedly confirm, I don't mean power dynamics, oppressed versus oppressor. That's not what I'm talking about. All right. Got that important point out of the way. Point 4. We're working through this. I think I only got 7 points. Yeah. Okay. The mechanics of false dialectics. Today's rulers manufacture false dialectics. Okay, so here's the common form, and I forgot to put the book here. It's from a book, though. What's the book called? It doesn't matter. You can Google this, and it'll tell you what book it's from. I think Nancy Pelosi said this in Congress once. I'm pretty sure it was Nancy Pelosi. Pretty sure. I don't know. I don't know YouTube rules very well. I don't know what's going to get me blocked. I know every single one of my transcripts is read and checked by AI, though. That is very, very interesting. So, to be clear, I don't know if Nancy Pelosi said this. I believe she did, and if she didn't, I'm happy to be wrong. But I'm pretty sure she quoted this modern form of dialectic, which is the problem reaction solution method. So, they, meaning the government, create or grossly exaggerate a crisis. That would be the problem. They provoke public panic and demand for action. That would be the reaction. And then impose a pre-planned solution that expands their power and erodes our liberties. We just saw this happen in Australia on Hanukkah. A group of people were at Bondi Beach in Australia celebrating Hanukkah. They were attacked by 2 gunmen. And these gunmen were from, I forget where they were from, but they were obviously not, they were from Saudi Arabia or something. I can't remember where they were from. And the government further took away gun rights from Australians, even though the 2 gunmen weren't even from Australia. And they did a number of other things. I can't remember all that they did, but they used this crisis to take away liberty. So how do you know? How can you spot if it's a government either taking advantage of a plan or being part of the action? This is what a false flag would be. If the result is expand the power and erodes our liberties, or in that case, the Australian liberties. That's how you know that it was not organic. To expose them, apply ruthless logic. Ruthless, like be able to say, oh, the government took liberties because they took liberties from Australians because non Australians came there and illegally, with illegal weapons, killed and hurt Australian citizens. And so the result is then to take away the liberties of the Australian citizens. Um, okay, here's some ruthless logic. The government was in on it. Is the problem fabricated? Ruthless, gaslight more so. Who, me or Australia? I'm not trying to gaslight anyone. But yeah, Australia definitely. Is the problem fabricated or wildly overstated? Yes. Does the offered fix disproportionately benefit elites while stripping rights from the people? Well, who do you consider elite? Because here was another thing. There is a group in Australia who now gets government subsidized armed security, and they don't have no. Yeah, the strategy normally applies to people. Yeah. So yeah, does it disproportionately benefit elites? So there is one group in Australia now since that event who is allowed to the government subsidized armed security while the rest of Australians don't get that benefit. And what else? There's something else that went along with that too. That whole Australian thing. Australia is always just a little bit ahead of us. Also, sci-fi novels, for whatever reason, when the aliens do invade, which apparently is happening because that's true and we all believe it. They always set up like this huge base camp in Australia. Like I have like 6 novels on my bookshelf where that's what happens. Like the aliens come and they set up their base camp in Australia. That's weird, right? Pre-programming. Okay, demand raw, unfiltered evidence. Yeah, demand it. See what happens. Reject the false binary entirely. Indeed, test everything as. Oh, that's right. I included a few Bible quotes in this too. Test everything as scripture. I don't know if it commands, but in I use the word commands, but it doesn't really command. But in First Thessalonians 5:21, test everything, hold fast what is good. Indeed, indeed, indeed. I believe St. Paul wrote that. All right. Bernays and the invisible government of influence. Okay. So false dialectics. That's a big one. They, without getting too into it, people will call that a Hegelian dialectic, the problem, reaction, solution, or they'll use the terms thesis, antithesis, synthesis. That's not Hegel. I mean, even Hegel wrote a paper saying he hates when people dumb down his term to that. He uses these big German words that I can never remember unless I reference them. But people will call that a Hegelian dialectic, but it's the PRS, problem reaction solutions, the PRS dialectic. Okay, so that's one mechanism. And I believe, maybe not, Nancy Pelosi mentioned that in Congress, and I'm pretty sure she did, and you can find the document. All right. Bernays and the invisible government of influence. So Edward Bernays, the father of modern propaganda, revealed the system in his 1928 book, Propaganda. He did reveal that, and I have this other book here too. This one. So in 1928, Bernays wrote Propaganda. It's a good book, but it's kind of cursory. And then in 1965, Jacques Ellul wrote this one, Propaganda, the Formation of Men's Attitudes. This one really gets into how you use propaganda as a weapon. And he quotes Goebbels, who was the chief. Who was Goebbels? I forget his title. He was one of the Nazis. Um, he ran Wehrmacht Communique. But this book gets into how propaganda is used as a weapon, like literally. When you're planning military operations, you plan how many troops you need, you plan how much ammunition you need, you plan supply lines, and you plan propaganda. This is a weapon of war, propaganda. So, Bernays is just the one that I'm going to reference here because he puts it in general terms, and this is supposed to be a general talk. And I spent half an hour in my preamble, so I guess we're only 40 minutes in, so we're doing all right. But the father of modern propaganda, revealed in the system, is 1928 book Propaganda. Quote, the conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in democratic society. An invisible government is the true ruling power. He talks about the invisible government over and over and over again in that book, and it's very interesting. If you can influence the leaders with or without conscious effort, you automatically influence the group which they sway. End quote. Every sphere of popular influence, media, academia, entertainment, and then he even goes down more. I wish I had that book with me right now. I don't have it. So he'll give you examples on like how you do it, and you just go to the phone book, and then you just go to professional organizations, and he just writes out, here's just a small section of the A's or the D's or whatever he did, and it's all of these different organizations. There's like the HVAC mechanics organization and all this. And he said each one of these has a leader. Each one of these is a point of influence. So it's not just media, academia, or entertainment. It is literally every sphere. Like Bernays was, he was teaching people when you do propaganda, you go to every sphere of influence you can, because you don't know if the HVAC mechanic is going to listen more to his pastor, or if he's going to listen more to his union head, or if he's going to listen more to the journeyman, or the journeyman mechanic at the conference. Like, so you go to all of them. So propaganda is not just what you see in the news. Propaganda could be coming from anywhere. Not to say all propaganda is bad. Hopefully, like what I'm doing right now is a propaganda video. I hope that this video gets shared and watched by people who are stuck in normalcy bias, and you wake up a little bit and you start taking care of yourselves, and you realize, okay, we got to come together and unify as a country, or we are literally going to be killed. Okay, so every sphere of popular influence is targeted to propagate the ruling ideology. Consent is not freely given, it is engineered. These tactics succeed only when citizens remain passive, which brings us to the deeper philosophical truth about human nature and political life. Yep, these tactics only succeed when we remain passive. Okay, what do I mean by passive? I'm glad you asked. Let's go to some philosophy. Why true citizenship demands courageous action. All right. We're doing good. We're making it. I'm going to take some water. I'm getting heated. I'm getting more into this than I do into Aristotle. Excuse me. Passive and given comforts. Yeah, that's for sure. Given comforts. Yeah. Pacified in that sense. Like someone is pacifying you, if I understand what you're saying, right? $100. Yep. All right. Aristotle. Yeah, exactly. Yep. Same page. Aristotle said in Politics, Book 1, quote, man is by nature a political animal. The polis is prior by nature to the household and to each of us. Yeah, gas prices being an example. Yeah. I saw this crazy video. I was sitting at work today and just kind of flipping through videos on X, and they're going up to people at the gas pump and they're asking them like, "How much do you think gas costs in Iran right now?" And they're like, "I don't know, $3, $2." And it's like 12 cents a gallon in United States dollars in Iran right now. People were losing their minds. But that's not what you meant exactly. That's just me. Yeah. Yeah. All right. So he said, Aristotle in Politics, Book 1, man is by nature a political animal. The polis is prior by nature. So this goes into a little bit of what we were talking about. Last couple weeks in Aristotle. So what he means by prior is um like it actually exists prior. Like it is to say that in the teleology of what it means to be human, the polis being prior means that to be political should be one of the higher aims of what it means to be human. Um, so the polis is prior by nature to the household and to each of us. Politics begins with the individual soul, extends to the family, the village, and finally, its end is the polis. So that's the thing about like priority and finality in those philosophical terms. The cause is like prior in terms of, yeah, it's metaphysically prior. All ordered toward the good life. All these things are ordered toward the good life and the cultivation of virtue. Inaction is a betrayal of our very nature as beings created for community and moral excellence. So, like in the proper order of the goods, to be political, the polis, that is to say, like the nation state, that is the ultimate like end of what it means to be human, because humans are a political animal. We don't exist in isolation. And another place in the politics, Aristotle defines politics as the interactions between any two people. Like, and I believe he says it is a moral interaction, which is to say, the implication there, or maybe he draws it out further. But when you're interacting with another person, because you're both moral subjects, it is a moral interaction. And that is like that the interaction between just two people, like you're meeting in the woods, you're meeting in the city, wherever it is, maybe you're the very first two people. It is a moral interaction because we're moral beings. You can't separate humanity from morality. And so politics is immediately intrinsically tied up into morality. And so if the proper end to be a human is to have this nation state, and there's a proper end for a human individually to achieve the highest good, which is to say the eudemia or the happy life, and we do that by moral praxis and habitus, which is to say um, choosing the good as often as we can, um, that is relative to us, and we make it a habit to do so on a regular basis, so as to make ourselves excellent, so as to perfect ourselves over time. And we're we're political creatures because we have to interact with each other. Then the highest good of the political creature in the political state is the nation state, that is where everyone is aiming towards that higher good and thus perfecting themselves to perfect the nation state, the polis. So politics is predicated on morality, and you can't have good politics without people who are predicating themselves, or who are predicated themselves on living the moral life, the virtuous life. The way to live the virtuous life, so we don't just have to all figure it out from scratch all the time, is through education. Education is the most important thing to have a just society where you don't have tyrants allowed to take over the way they have now in our country. And what is the number one thing that we have like an issue with in our country? Like, maybe not the number one thing, maybe it is though. It's a really big one. Our education sucks. We don't talk about what it means to be human at all. It is the biggest one because what's the point if we're just going to have the government being taken over by these tyrannical sociopaths? Then yeah, education is the most important thing. And I know for sure my generation was let down. So many of us had crucial portions of our lives where we were just kind of like floundering, and so many of us had to realize what was right because of the atrocities that took place to us or to the people we love. Education is the most important one. The biblical and ethical foundation of strength. I put that. I don't know if that's quite right. I don't know if it's the foundation. This is not a biblical foundation. The biblical foundation would be the transcendental principle that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, and that to live a morally excellent life primarily includes following Christ. So I stated that incorrectly in my notes. So I'm sorry I read it out loud. The Bible echoes this with clarity. Proverbs 14:15 warns. These are just good verses. The simple believes everything, but the prudent gives thought to his steps. That is quite right. And prudence is a virtue. Prudence is one of the cardinal virtues. Cardinal meaning it is a virtue on which all other virtues hinge on. Cardinal is that Latin term that means hinge. So they are courage, prudence, justice, and temperance. I believe are the four cardinal virtues. Those are the hinge virtues on which all other virtues hinge. And these are taken. Thomas Aquinas did a lot of work on them, but those are in Aristotle, I believe. Okay, so the simple believes everything, right? The simple meaning the foolish, the dumb. They believe everything, but the prudent gives thought to his steps. Hosea 4:6 says, "My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge." James 2:26 states, "Faith without works is dead." Indeed, although maybe not relevant if you have no faith, although I believe you ought to have faith. These teachings, alongside the examples of Christ, point to a moral order that calls us to strength, virtue, and an unyielding defense of the innocent and the true. Values that have proven essential for free societies. That is an interesting point, and that's probably why I included it. As I'm reading these, I can't remember why I included the biblical stuff, but Christianity really changed politics. That is like a very interesting thing. If you study the history of politics, you see a lot start to change with Alexander the Great, but then Alexander the Great's successors really, really, really were awful guys. So when Alexander the Great died, he divvied up his kingdom to his, I think it was 12 generals or 10 generals. Maybe it was fewer than that. I can't remember. But man, they went off the rails. They were awful rulers. But Alexander the Great, student of Aristotle, he did some great things. He did some really, really great things. In terms of building an empire. So then you have Alexander the Great, then you have his generals take over, and then you have the generals, I think, great grandsons, who ended up going to war with the Hebrews again, and that's where you have first, second, and third. I think it's first, second, and third Maccabees, but there's the Maccabean revolts. The Maccabees, those are awesome guys. Those are books in the Bible. The Maccabees, Judas Maccabeus. Maccabee means hammer. They had this method where they would hammer, retreat, hammer, retreat. Judas Maccabeus destroyed those rapist Greeks. They were absolutely evil men who succeeded Alexander the Great, and the Maccabees put them in their place. Okay, but then you have the Maccabees, and then about 100, I think it was like 115, 120 years later, then you have Jesus. Then you have Christianity start to flood the world, and boy, did politics change after that. It is just kind of crazy how Christian principles changed politics in a very, very real way. Okay, that's why I included those. Christianity is important. Also, I would love it if everyone was a Christian, although I will not force it upon you at the sword, because that is not the Christian way. I just want the best for you. Karl von Clausewitz. If you ever read any military books or military history or anything, everyone since since Clausewitz will inevitably reference back to Clausewitz, and his book on war is yeah, if you're interested in military history, you just have to read On War. It's a good book. So he wrote in On War, quote, "War is merely the continuation of politics by other means." He goes on to say, "A continuation of political intercourse with the addition of other means. So war requires the passionate consent of the people. Governments therefore manufacture that consent through a deception, precisely because they know an awakened citizenry would refuse." So pacifying the citizenry, like Corey commented, passive and given comforts, like giving comforts, giving concessions. That goes all the way back to Rome, the bread and circuses. How do you pacify? How do you pacify a population? Well, you give them enough food, you give them enough distractions, and you give them intoxicants. That's another thing that is often not mentioned with bread and circuses, but intoxicants like beer and other drugs, wine. Was it beer back then? I think there was a barley beer. Um, Hallucinogens were a big one in Rome. But because you need the passionate consent of the people, governments therefore manufacture that consent through deception, precisely because they know an awakened citizenry would refuse. And in the stage of Rome, when it was ran by the Senate, they would make important decisions on gladiator days, on Colosseum days. So everyone would be at the Colosseum. Not everyone, but a lot of people would be at the Colosseum, and I believe there was even like government incentives to get people there. I'm trying to remember how that worked. But then the Senate would hold these like secret meetings, and they'd pass laws that take away liberties and all kinds of stuff. Until you have the Julian decrees, which is in late stage Rome. And Julian, who's the emperor for the Julian laws? Yeah, can't remember. And I'm not doing a history lesson on Rome right now, so let me stay focused. Okay. So Clausewitz, the reason why I pointed that out is you can't have any type of war without political consent. Okay. So we would like to think we get the consent, right? We're propagandized to, we get to be on board with it. We get to have a say, right? And we get to like we get to really be gung ho about the wars we go to, right? At least that's the way things are painted in history. I mean, even isn't it crazy how even like the Vietnam War is still like portrayed in a way that like, well, people were on board. Well, what was the first thing I pointed out? Operation Northwoods, where they used false flags to get everyone on board with it. Then you have movies like First Blood and things like that are really, really pointing out that is not the case. But the way kids are taught about it today is like, well, everyone was on board, and like it didn't work out as well as it should have, but at least everyone was on board. So there's this history of consent to try to manufacture future consent. Now, the founders of our nation were very astute men, and they wrote essentially the idea that the founders warned against was that you can consent to things. Yeah, pharma. No, that's a great point. Intoxicants, very good point. Makes me think of pharma. 100%, man. And then, so recently I was looking into, let me just pull it up on my phone because I can't remember. But I was really going down an MK Ultra rabbit hole, and I was pulling up, where's it at? And if you guys aren't familiar with MK Ultra, there's just these crazy experiments that the CIA didn't do. Keep them docile or scattered, never aligned and balanced. Yeah, 100%, dude. Divide them and conquer them. Where did I put this at? Oh, here we go. So this is the General Counselors of Department of Defense. If you guys don't know this, but like you can just pull up declassified documents that have been declassified. You're allowed to read them. You can go and read it, and then you don't have to call everyone who says like our government is doing crazy shit a conspiracy theorist, and you can just be informed. By the way, um, yeah, Chaos. I never finished that book. I started it though, and I've always wished I would have finished it, but I didn't. Okay, so this was okay. So here's the sub MK programs. There was MK Ultra, which is like the umbrella program, and then there's MK Delta. This was apparently the first project established by CIA in October 1952. Reading out of a declassified document from General Counsel of the Department of Defense that was this memo was put together on September 20th, 1977. Memorandum for the Secretary of Defense. Okay. I'm reading an official government document here. MK Delta. This was apparently the first project established by the CIA in October 1952 for the use of biochemicals in clandestine operations and may have never been implemented operationally. Right? Wink, wink. May not have been. MK Ultra. Oh, that's right. MK Ultra is not the umbrella group. This was the successor project to MK Delta, established in April 1953 and terminating sometime in the late 1960s, probably after 1966. This program considered various means of controlling human behavior. Drugs were only one aspect of this activity. Okay, then there's Naomi. Oh, here's the one. MK Search. This was apparently a successor project to MK Ultra, which began in 1965 and was terminated in 1973. The objective of the project was to develop a capability to manipulate human behavior in a predictable manner through the use of drugs. And then this memo is only 17 pages long, but like development and administration of speech-inducing drugs, administration of LSD to human subjects. These are just some of the subpoints where they, and this is just a memo. So that means that they found like the CIA documents and they're putting a memo together for the Secretary of Defense. So this is just a reference to like the findings from these programs. Air Force programs, record search, programs identified. Where's it at? Anyway, yeah, intoxicants through pharma. There's just a lot of stuff they figured out, and like they would do sensory deprivation or they would do overstimulation on certain types of drugs. And then if you look at some of the studies on like flicking through TikTok and that type of overstimulation, accompanied with certain hallucinogens that they use in the MK programs, like LSD and others, but you compare that to the way like people are microdosing shrooms throughout the day, and they're overstimulating. That is something they found that they can control behavior with. That exact modality of certain dosages of hallucinogens with overstimulation, even things with weed and all kinds of stuff. So like there's not just like the direct like just make them drunk, make them high, whatever. But there's also these sophisticated ways that they have found that they can manipulate human behavior and control outcomes with human behavior. So that's something to keep in mind too. Is like, I mean, this goes back to like Marcus Aurelius too. Of like the obstacle is the way. Like the easy way, the comfortable way, is often not the beneficial thing. And usually, if the comfortable thing is easily available, it's probably being made easily available for your own demise. So something to be very aware of, especially if it's easy to make comfort a habit. I'm extremely guilty of it. We all are. But we just need to be aware of it. And then we need to ask why. And the more comfortable you are, the easier it is to be. Like we were looking at the normalcy bias stuff at the beginning, like your mind wants homeostasis, your body wants homeostasis. If it's free, you are the product. Yeah, 100%, dude. Yeah, I forget where that quote's from. Free or easy. Yep, you are the product. Absolutely. Yep. Very well said. From my we gotta just get another microphone in here, dude. my my co-host Corey Cor Corlope 995 Corlop. We'll just call you Corlop. Okay. So back to what the founders were warning against. So you need political consent in order to go to war. Remember, Clausewitz is writing specifically about war. The Declaration of Independence affirms that governments, quote, derive their just powers from the consent of the governed, end quote. Inaction itself is consent. Inaction is consent. So if you can get the governed to be docile and not participate at all, that is also a way to manufacture consent. So you don't have to have this like how did Clausewitz put it? The passionate consent. You can also just have inaction. You can have a completely disengaged public, and you can gain consent that way. Patrick Henry warned, quote, the liberties of a people never were secure when the transactions of their rulers may be concealed. The spirit of Jefferson and the founders cries out that eternal vigilance is the price of liberty. Silence in the face of evil is complicity. This moral and philosophical foundation leads directly to the indispensable role of individual virtue. So, what do I mean by that? Individual virtue as the indispensable foundation. Good supporting figure to that point is the active voter stat. Yeah. Yeah, I know. I just heard about that recently. Good supporting figure, the comment is good supporting figure is the point in the active voter stat. Yeah. The active voter it's like isn't like 20% of the population votes or something like that? It's a really low number. And so then when you hear things like, well, Trump got 53% of the votes, like, well, isn't that like 53% of 23% of the population? So it's like 11% of the population actually voted for him or something like that. So it's not like, oh, is it? It's in the high 40s to mid 50s. Even still, I mean, and is that going off of the 350 million number? Because some of those numbers about how many people are even here legally, or they say that we have 250 million, Americans living here. I said earlier, I don't know if you caught it, but I recently read an estimate that up to 100 million people are here illegally. So, yeah, allegedly. Yep. I read it. Okay, I didn't come up with that figure. I read it. Allegedly. I'm not claiming that is the case. I'm speculating if it's true or not. Okay. Moral foundation. So, if the government needs political consent to go to war and they're able to gain that consent through a docile, disengaged populace, then how can we combat against that? In 1798, John Adams declared, he didn't declare it. Why am I using these words? Okay. John Adams wrote in his book, I declare. No, he wrote this. Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. So, our Constitution is wholly inadequate to the government of any other people besides a moral and religious people. This applies not merely to businessmen or elites, but to every individual citizen whose character undergirds the republic. I put that last sentence in there because in 1798, voters were landowners, businessmen, that sort of thing. But the principle still applies. I know, dude. I was very passionate. He declares. All right. And then Adam Smith wrote in The Theory of Moral Sentiments to quote, to feel much for others and little for ourselves constitutes the perfection of human nature, end quote. And in Wealth of Nations, he wrote, quote, by pursuing his own interests, the businessman, but I think we can switch the businessman out for the individual to put it into our context. I think that still works. I'm trying to be as honest as I can to Wealth of Nations, which was one of the first books on capitalism, not this new form of capitalism we have. I forget what the economists are calling it, crony capitalism or whatever. But so let me just change that language around. In The Wealth of Nations, he wrote, by pursuing his own interests, the individual frequently promotes that of the society more effectually than when he really intends to promote it. So crucially, Smith understood that this self interest advances society only when it is firmly predicated on moral education and character. Virtue, and Smith specifically highlighted prudence, justice, and benevolence, is the very oxygen of a free republic. Without it, no constitution can endure. History offers living models of this virtue in action. So, in order for us to even be the proper type of participant in the type of government that we have, that has to be predicated by a moral education. And then I think in a later chapter, Adam Smith goes on in The Wealth of Nations. He talks about the education system that is necessary, and it has to be rooted in these three virtues. And I think it is interesting that he didn't state all of the cardinal virtues, but he highlighted these three: prudence, justice, and benevolence. And he seemed to really have this emphasis on the benevolence, the goodness toward others, not just the individual aim upward, but also you have to have this idea of benevolence. And then, so in The Wealth of Nations, he said, that's how you're a good businessman, and by pursuing your own self interest, that self interest being predicated on these three virtues of prudence, justice, and benevolence. That if you have a good solid foundation as an individual of understanding, of being prudent, of understanding that you have to look out for the common good, because again, justice is the political mechanism to ensure the common good, and benevolence, that through the invisible hand of God then will bring wealth to the nation. A little optimistic, and Adam Smith has his critics, and he was even his own critic. But I think the principle still holds. And then especially if you're going to be the type of people who are governed by this type of constitutional republic, where you're going to be a self-governed nation, then education has to be the predicate to all that. Good moral education. And education doesn't just mean learning your ABCs and 2 + 2 = 5 or whatever they want you to learn from 1984. It means learning at least prudence, justice, and benevolence, but the cardinal virtues would be superior. Education is so key. I saw a clip the other day from an old Charlie Kirk interview. I think it was one of his debates, or I think it was a debate at Oxford or something. Yeah, Kant definitely did. The ontological virtue ethics. He definitely did. Kant's an interesting dude too. His dad was a Lutheran pastor, and there's a lot of Lutheran stuff in there. Yeah, because it's good and not to look good. Yep. Yep. Um, I saw this Charlie Kirk debate the other day, and they just asked like maybe it wasn't a debate, maybe it was just one of his things. I can't remember. Where he's just sitting there talking, but he was asked if you could end or if you could shut down any government institution, what would it be? And like without thinking, he just said Department of Education. And the more I think about like how important education is, the more I tend to agree with that because of what a travesty our Department of Education is. The whole thing needs to be shut down. The whole government needs to be shut down anyway. Was it Jefferson who said, "From time to time, in order to preserve to preserve our republic, the tree of liberty must be watered with the blood of tyrants and of patriots." It's time for the whole thing to be shut down. All right. What can we do as individuals to right the ship? Our imperative duty. Begin today by treating every official story as suspect. Read primary sources, demand proof, habituate the habits of logic and virtue exactly as Aristotle prescribed through relentless daily practice grounded in a commitment to truth. Live the moral life Adams demanded. Prioritize your family as the first polis. Teach your children real history, critical thinking, and the unchanging principles of justice and courage. Starve, starve every vice that weakens the republic. Pursue values of strength and integrity that have sustained free societies across time. What's a good measure to understand what is a vice or a virtue? And specifically, what I mean, starve every vice that weakens the republic. Well, these would be things that keep people docile. So, if you see systems, or if you see movements, or if you see talking points, or like it is the good common advice to give someone to pursue and to stay comfortable, that is a vice that should be starved. That you need to put poison on the roots of that. And you need to encourage people to choose the hard path. That is how we find meaning. And that is how we pursue virtue. If you see things that are anti-human and saying that we don't need to carry on our own bloodlines, that is a vice. If you if you see anything that is detrimental to the things that we've talked about up to this point, you need to be vocal, and you need to be able to speak up against it. Pursue the values of strength and integrity that have sustained free societies across time. Expose every manufactured crisis on site. Support independent voices of truth. Refuse their binary traps. Become the influencer in your own sphere, wielding influence for clarity rather than deception. Speak truth publicly and without apology. Engage at every level: school boards, town halls, primaries. Build parallel institutions of family, faith, and local liberty. Vote as though the future watches. Defend the innocent and stand for what is good and true, even at the cost of comfort or safety. And also learn about like your local programs, because I'm registered in Oregon as no party affiliation, which turns out I didn't know this, and I should have done my research, but I didn't. If you're registered as no party affiliation, you don't get to vote in the primary. So I got my primary ballot in the mail, because we everything's in mail in Oregon, which is ridiculous. And we there's a gubernatorial race this year, and the gubernatorial primaries are happening right now, and there's no gubernatorial candidate for the primary on my ballot because I'm independent, or not independent. I have no party affiliation. In my mind, I thought I was going to just see everybody, but it turns out if you're not affiliated with a party in Oregon, you don't get to see any of them. So, lesson learned for me: I don't get a vote. Um, but figure out like what your local jurisdictional things are. Like I should have done better research into that and got things situated. And then look at every candidate. Like I don't care about Republican, Democrat, whatever it is. Like you have to judge them by their, not even by what they say. Like you have to figure out a way to judge people by their fruit. You have to be able to judge people by their actions, and you really have to have a track record, which is so hard to vote for politicians. Yeah, dude. I was pretty bummed out when I got my ballot in the mail yesterday. And yeah. Yeah. But then if you choose a party affiliation, apparently you only get that party on your ballot too, which is like I don't even know how to choose a party. I don't even know how to choose a party. David Medina seems cool, but I don't know him very well. I don't know any of these politicians very well. And then I don't know what the constraints are if you, because to have Medina like to vote, he's in the Republican primary. Yeah, dude, 100%. Oregon, uh, Oregon. This is like this is a crazy state for voting. Like you can't vote in person. It's all mail. Ballot boxes get burned down every voting period. And then there's all of these like hoops you have to jump through even to like vote for people. It's crazy. And like if I want to vote, like say I want to vote for like Republican judges, or say in a perfect world I'm able to research every single candidate and I have this whole mix. Like I want to vote for this Republican judge, this Democrat, whatever county seat, and I want to vote independent on whoever else, and then Republican for governor. You can't even do that in Oregon. Like if you register Republican, you only get the Republican candidates. So yeah, yeah, they won't send a. Yeah, I'm politically fluid, man. Like, could you imagine? Oh my gosh, we live in a crazy state. Oh my goodness, what a crazy state. It's all right. They don't know what's coming. I've seen this play out. These little local landholders is what how I equate them to the Middle Ages. These local landholders, they always think they have more power than they do, and then it comes to bite them, and it bites them hard. I should feel triggered and sue. They don't care about me, dude. They don't care about me at all. They just laugh at me. I got one of those traffic tickets with the light flashing. I was going like 7 miles over the speed limit. One of the options on the ticket was like you can appeal, but you have to write a letter to the judge. So I wrote this letter. It's like 6 a.m. Conditions were clear, dry, plenty of light. There were no pedestrians around. You could check the cameras to see that that is true. There were no pedestrians around. Like I was fully aware of my situation, and I made the conscious decision to drive over the speed limit because there were no other cars, there were no pedestrians, conditions were clear and dry. Made the conscious decision as a free American citizen and operating my own vehicle to safely exceed the 35-mile-an-hour speed limit to 42 miles an hour. Like not even crazy. So I submitted the letter and all that, and they just laughed at me. They're like, I could tell they wanted to say something because of the way I look saying it. Like they don't care, man. They don't care. You have to look a certain way to be triggered. Ah, man. We live in a sad time. All right. We are not without guides. I think I'm on the last page. Let me just finish it up. No, I got 2 pages left. We are not without guides. St. Louis IX, the King of France, embodied this when he wrote in Consul to his son, quote, love all good and hate all evil, in whomsoever it may be. Love and protect justice, and neither neglect nor despise the complaints of the needy. End quote. He governed with strict justice, defended the vulnerable, and acted decisively against corruption. St. Joan of Arc, the saint warrior, declared with unyielding resolve, quote, I am not afraid. I was born to do this. End quote. And, quote, in God's name, let us go on bravely. End quote. A young woman who stood alone against overwhelming odds, she defended her people and the truth through courageous action. Shame on you for being logical. No thinking aloud. I know. I know. That's all right. That is all right. I've seen this story before. I've read it many times. We will have our day. Nonviolently, politically, we will have our day. All right. In order to know the difference between good and evil, we must seek the good through truth and study it. We must define what is corrupting, vile, and evil and stand against it. We must understand courage so as to be brave and combat cowardice. We must not allow ourselves to be swayed by political correctness or the fear of being cast out by what's currently, quote, acceptable. We must be bold and stand firm and understand our values to such an extent we are willing to lay down our lives for them. And then these are just some examples I thought of that we can think of in terms of, well, what is good and evil? Because I like what St. Louis IX said, the King of France. Love all good and hate all evil, in whomsoever it may be. So love the good in whomever it may be in, and hate the evil in whomever it be in. Love and protect justice, and neither neglect nor despise the complaints of the needy. Protecting the complaints of the needy and the most vulnerable is historically what the common good is predicated on to begin with. Going all the way back to King David, protecting the vulnerable is what the common good is predicated on, meaning the widows, children, and the poor. So, and then you have to like break those down and actually think about them and not just be intellectually lazy. But like a widow could also be, in the philosophical sense, any woman without the protection of a man, meaning whether that just be the financial things in our society, but also the legitimate protection against like the security aspect of it. Like a woman without a man, even now, sorry if you don't like it, there is an element of security that she doesn't have. And she is more vulnerable than like a man who's on his own, obviously. Obviously. I'm like in my mind now debating the specifics of that. If someone disagrees with me, and it's like, it's crazy how many points I just won in my mind, man. But and then children, obviously they are more vulnerable than average citizen, even if it was just a single man on his own. Like a group of children are more vulnerable than that one man. And then the poor, or the infirmed, those who are, they're not physically able to do the things necessary to receive from society based off of what they contribute. So whether they be handicapped or mentally impaired or whatever the case may be, the infirmed. And so St. Louis, the King of France, St. Louis IX, we are neither to neglect nor despise the complaints of the needy. And that's, again, predicated on this idea of the most vulnerable, which in any just society, if the needs of the most vulnerable are taken care of, because this is what the common good should be based off of, is the needy or the most vulnerable. And then you extrapolate from there the system of laws that you would need, then you would obviously have laws that have security instilled. You'd have some social programs instilled, and you would have basically laws that keep the proper bounds of virtue and meritocracy. Oh, Nate, you're just saying all this stuff that's new. No, I'm not. This goes back thousands of years. Read some dang old political philosophy. Stop thinking it's this white nationalist, brand new Christian nationalism thing. It's not. This is like before Christianity, philosophers were thinking about this. Goodness. All right. So here's some examples to think about. Is it right to give others out of charity before taking care of what is your responsibility? Would it be good or evil to feed a stranger while letting my children starve? No, that would not be good. So is it right for the republic to take care of people who are not citizens before it takes care of its citizenry? Also, do you not know that a citizen is a very important title that we have the honor and privilege to bear, and that being a self-governed republic, like if we use that analogy of me feeding a stranger while my children starve, like that is obviously an evil thing to do. How are we caring for our resources? I was reading today about the amount of oil and water that is needed for all these data centers going up everywhere. So we live in one of the most valuable nations in terms of resources. Why are we using so much water and oil on data centers? These are just two examples I thought of when we're talking about good and evil of a society. And earlier I was saying we need to starve out the vices in our society in order to perpetuate these good characteristics. So how do you identify them? These are just a couple examples that I thought of. Where are we putting our resources? Where are we putting them? Are we helping the citizenry first? And then if there's any surplus, then we're helping others? Or are we prioritizing others at the detriment of the citizenry? And if it's at the detriment of the citizenry, what do you think the goal of that is? The purpose of a system is its outcome. And this is like a mechanical concept, but it applies to politics. So like a combustion engine, the purpose of that system, that closed system, is to have a certain power output. So the purpose of that system is the power that it produces. To use that mechanical analogy in politics, the purpose of a system is its product, what it produces. So if it produces the destruction of the citizenry, that is probably the purpose of that system. And our current system is producing the destruction of the citizenry. Therefore, we need to scrap that system and build a new one. All right. There are many, I put all caps. There are many more examples, and I'm sure you can think of examples yourself. I'm sure you can. I hope you can. If you can't, leave a comment. We'll talk about it next time. This is a really interesting fact. The power of critical mass. We do not need universal awakening to prevail. Rigorous political science demonstrates that a committed minority can tip the scales. Erica Chenoweth's landmark research on nonviolent resistance, analyzing hundreds of campaigns from 1900 onward, established the 3.5% rule. No government has withstood a challenge once 3.5% of the population activity mobilized in a peak nonviolent event. In the United States, that threshold is roughly 11 to 12 million citizens. Every such campaign that reached this level succeeded, creating disruption, demonstrating a broad sympathy, and rendering the status quo untenable. A small but resolute group acting with moral clarity has repeatedly changed history. And then here's a side note. All the socialist and Marxist organizations are after the same 3.5%. They're trying to get to that critical mass of 11 to 12 million Americans. Our own government is after 3.5%. And we must be equally ambitious. If we pursue truth, our task should have the least resistance, theoretically. But it will not be easy. Many are trapped in a false reality. Do not lie and keep truth on your side. This is also why I was mentioning at the beginning, I've been wrong about major political philosophies. I thought democratic socialism was a good idea. I thought democratic anarchy was a good idea. And I was wrong about that. And you have to keep truth on your side. And if you keep truth as your side, like as soon as you start to realize the holes in those systems and you realize, like I said in my example, okay, no democratic socialist I'm ever gonna like any definition of it, I'm never gonna be able to find a good concept of free trade. Okay, then that's out. I'm never going to be able to find a good concept of common good. Okay, then that's out. The same thing with democratic anarchy. I couldn't find a formalized conception of it that had a good definition of justice and a good definition of virtue. Okay, that's out. Like, so you have to keep truth on your side, so you can continue to grow. And I don't pretend to have all of the answers now. Um, but I know I'm getting closer to the truth. Like that has to be the goal. Like you can't expect to be like perfectly politically knowledgeable about everything, but you can't assume that you know the right way because you're like part of a certain group. You have to keep truth on your side, and you have to be able to admit when you're wrong. And I'm able to like have more charitable quote unquote debates with people who are still stuck in these like these more leftist types of thinking because I can ask them clear questions that were helpful for me because I was focused on like figuring out what was true. So if you deny yourself, like, no, I always knew that like that was bad, then like, how are you ever gonna like help other people wake up? Like, that's the whole allegory of the cave. It's like, no, we were all chained. Like, maybe we all had different ideas, but we had something keeping us chained, looking at shadows and thinking we knew it was real. Then we got out. Then we start to move up out of the cave, and when we see truth for itself, then we have to go back down to the cave and we have to set other people free. Like that is the most critical point of any enlightenment process is going and helping other people be free. Do not demand an act you would not do yourself, and be ready to give a reason for any action. We must be a virtuous cause. Confront the present evidence that the pattern continues. Look at the last year alone. They promised full transparency on the Epstein files. They signed the act in November 2025, missed every deadline, and in January 2026 released 3.5 million heavily redacted pages, videos, and images while shielding the true client list and protecting powerful perpetrators. Victims' names were exposed by accident, but the elite network remains untouched. There still have been no Epstein arrests. And they say that 3.5 million documents, they keep saying it's half, but like when it originally came out, they said it was like 4%. So there's like, which is it? Is it 50% or 4%? Because those are two different numbers. Bunch of idiots. I think it's estimated there's like 20 million files, and they only released 3.5 million. So that's a big deal. That's a really big deal. No one's been arrested. This is deception in real time. Meanwhile, endless foreign wars, Ukraine, and in the 2026 escalation, because it's not a war, right? Congress didn't declare it. It's a military action or whatever. Involving Iran choking the Strait of Hormuz, have gutted global fertilizer supplies. That's the other thing people don't realize is going on in Ukraine is like that's the breadbasket of Europe. 1/3 of seaborne trade is disrupted. American farmers report 70% cannot afford adequate supplies. 25%, 1 in 4 farmers have no supplies. It's growing season. Bankruptcies have surged 46% amongst farmers, and 15,000 farms have been lost. Food shortages food shortages are skyrocketing. Prices are being engineered. Um, Food shortages and skyrocketing prices are being engineered for your table. Yet they call it, quote, geopolitical necessity, while concealing the true motives and alliances. Well, maybe they're not really concealing the alliances at this point, but We know who our greatest ally is. Our government partners with foreign powers and global bodies whose ends are not America's, prioritizing agendas that harm our people while their real objectives remain hidden. This is the pattern repeating before our eyes. The philosophical case is now complete. The moment for action has arrived. Let me just sum up the whole thing real quick. From the normalcy bias that blinds us through the brutal lessons of history, the Machiavellian playbook of deceit, the false dialectics and propaganda machines that manufacture consent, to the profound philosophical and moral imperatives that politics begins with a virtuous individual, every thread converges on one inescapable truth. A republic lives or dies by the courage, clarity, and action of its citizens. Aristotle revealed our political nature. The ethical tradition rooted in Christ's teachings supplies the moral foundation of strength and justice. The founders entrusted us with consent. The founders entrusted us with consent, guys. That's a big deal. I mean, these are all big deals, but consent, and warned that silence is surrender. The Epstein deceptions, the fertilizer crisis, and the concealed foreign entanglements are not distant warnings. They are the pattern unfolding right now. Therefore, reject the bias, the normalcy bias. Cultivate virtue grounded in moral education. Speak truth boldly. Organize locally. Multiply the awake. Withdraw consent through relentless principled action. History and political science confirm that a committed critical mass can right the ship. The republic will not save itself. You must seize the wheel today, with the resolve that has defined every defender of liberty before us. The hour is late. The choice and the responsibility is yours. Begin now. This is important stuff. I didn't talk about practicalities, but specifically, this is not for Corlop 995, but to my other friends in California, who have been telling you this for lots of time. There's not going to be food soon. Get some dang food for your family. Stop putting it off. Stop acting like everything's normal. For everyone else, lab grown meat, it's not going to be here quick enough. There's not going to be food soon. Get some food, even if it's just for yourself. And if you have a family, you need to really think hard about this. This is real. This is real. This is what's been on my mind lately. And I was hoping to get all the way through classical philosophy before I started jumping into some of the more political stuff, because you can't have politics without predicating that on a virtuous education. So I thought I should start with the classical philosophy and talk about metaphysics and virtue and all that kind of stuff. But like I said, the last couple of weeks have been crazy busy and I haven't researched Aristotle that much. So this was easy for me to put together, and so I did it. And it's important and it's timely. And goodness gracious, if you are still living in that normalcy bias, you need to wake up. Stop living in your left-right divide. Stop choosing a political camp. They are trying to destroy you like every other tyrannical government in history. So get your act together. Start living life. Sorry if you're scared. It's going to be okay. You can join the 12 million of us. We're building. That critical mass is amassing. And things are going to be all right. And we can hopefully do it politically, non-violently. And hopefully it doesn't come to anything more. But they declared war on us. So what are you going to do? All right. That is all I got. 2 hours, 14 minutes. Not bad. One of my longer streams. Please, if you like this, if it was entertaining, if it was good stuff, 2 hours might be a lot for some people. This isn't quite a short propaganda video. It's not short and punchy, but please share it with someone who might be able to benefit from it. Hopefully the argument was cogent and logically structured to at least get you thinking that you need to certainly look more into the things I said. And again, the links just down to those false flags Those declassified documents are down below. One of them is from a 1976 book, so there's not like declassified. Um, the Spain one, that one is from a 1976 book, so there's not a declassified document on that. But that was obviously the government seizing an opportunity to go to war with Spain, and or who knows, they might have blown up their own ship and just said it was a Spanish mine. Because we've done that lots. Or our allies have done that for us to get us into conflicts. And then what else? Look into stuff. Maybe start to consider. I'm trying hard to go back to like the way I used to think, and I'm really struggling because I know there was a time when I had a hard time believing that our government had anything but our own interests at heart, or I would assume that these politicians passing these policies that are obviously leading to detrimental ends are just politically naive, or they really think that like communism is a good idea. But no. What's the quote? Like, don't assign stupidity when you can assign malice, or something like that. Maybe it's the other way around, but this isn't stupidity. Like, our politicians are playing roles. They are actors, in my opinion. They are all actors, even the good ones, playing a role. And I don't think there are any pure politicians. And I think that they don't have our best interests at heart. And I think that is real. And if you look in history, and if you start thinking of yourself like a feud, or, a serf, that's the word. You start thinking of yourself as a feudal serf living in a dukedom. Remember, when you read the history books of all the dukes going to wars and stuff, and you hear about just a certain amount of people died or a certain amount of people starved. Look at the freaking Soviet Union when they starved out Ukraine. It was like 9 million people starved within 3 or 4 years, and then the food rations and everything else that were implemented. It's estimated between 50 and 90 million Soviets died under Stalin's rule. That was less than 100 years ago in the West that happened, if you consider Russia the West, or the Soviet Union. I guess they're pretty far east, or they're just directly like northwest of us, if you know how to read a globe, I guess. I just hope you guys wake up. I hope it's going to be all right. All right, that's all I got for tonight. I will see you guys next week, and I plan on having the rest of Aristotle's metaphysics finished. So we'll get back to that. All right, have a good night.